né, cara? Vamos chegar lá, nós vamos chegar lá, aguenta aí.
Hello, I'm Flo Steinberg, and I had the distinct pleasure of working for Stan Lee at Marvel Comics from 1963 to 1968.
Okay, let him hear it, gang.
You would hear them shouting, or Stan would jump on the desk to make a point. I mean, they were superheroes. I wasn't actually in the room, but you could hear them through the thin walls shouting, and, you know, maybe sometime if something was going on in our office, we'd have to say, hey, keep it down, or something.
March along, march along, march along to the song.
Although Flo doesn't seem to have changed, over the years the rest of the staff have. Marvel has now grown into a corporation of over 500 workers.
Joe Quesada, editor for Marvel Comics.
O Joe Quesada ainda tava na Marvel,
Joe
né?
Quesada joined Marvel
Saiu
in the
esse
90s,
ano, né?
and of course is an enormous fan of Ditko.
Between Kirby and Ditko, you had probably two of the best masters in the field. You know, Kirby with the way that his characters moved in that very big, over-dramatic sense, and Steve with a much more subtler approach, but yet creating iconic imagery like Spider-Man shooting the webs. Steve was also creating costumes for characters that had never really been seen before. You know, at that point, it was all traditionally, hey, put the guy's underwear over the tights. It was sort of the strong man in the circus kind of
There's
costume.
the belt with the buckle, their gloves,
The boots, the whole thing, right? And yet Steve created this bizarre, and I could only put it in the time and place, because to me I see Spider-Man now and it's commonplace, but I could only imagine when this was created in '62 that people looking at going, that's the weirdest costume ever. And his face is covered, which is, you know, a huge change from what has come before, where usually characters, if they're getting masked, they wear the cowl, with a little domino mask kind of thing. That's one of the reasons why Spider-Man is so relatable. When he puts on that mask, he could be anyone.
Cara, o uniforme do Aranha é um dos designs mais legais que tem, assim. Se você parar pra pensar a época em que ele foi feito, a simetria que ele possui, né, na sua estrutura, né, tanto a distribuição da área vermelha, que acaba desenhando todo o longo do braço, assim, tu tem isso meio que demarcando o tronco, as pernas ficam em azul, e aí tu tem o pé somente vermelho. Apesar das teias serem muito a moda Miguelão nesse período aí, o John Romita Sr. entrou quando ele sistematiza, né, o desenho das teias do Aranha, mas é um design muito inovador para a época. Muito, muito, muito inovador, cara. Muito.
In the years following Steve Ditko's decision to leave Spider-Man, the character's popularity continued to boom. There was this rather poor animation series in 1967, although, admittedly, that's one hell of a catchy tune. The 70s saw Spidey go live action with this TV series filled with overacting extras.
Esse Aranha, cara, eu vi as reprises dessa bosta aí. Velho, o olho dele parecia um coador de leite. Sabe aquele coador de leite de metal que você vai botar, tira, separar a nata, velho? Eu olhava pra aquilo e ficava, caraca, será que dá pra fazer uma máscara com 2 coador de leite, assim?
Did you see that? Did you see it, Captain? That's the Spider-Man, the guy in the paper. Who is that character anyway?
And this rather brilliant
Ah,
oddity
sim,
from Turkey
o
shows
Aranha
a different
turco.
side to Spider-Man, casting him as a ruthless, evil sadist.
Çalıştırın.
No two ways about it.
Tenso.
Spider-Man is
Trasgo Caolho, o uniforme do Aranha me parece um dos melhores que representa a ideia do personagem, muito autoexplicativo a propósito. Boa noite, Trasgo, obrigado aí pelo comentário, cara. É até a automoderação da Twitch entendeu a tua palavra aranha como algo bizarro, né? Eu tô permitindo aqui você poder usar a palavra bizarro pra caralho. Não sei por quê. Esse desfile promovido pela Macy's, né, que era no Dia da Ação de Graça, se eu não me engano, essa parada que tinha lá nos Estados Unidos, o SBT até passava às vezes. O John Romita Sr., que já tinha assumido toda a parte de direção de arte e de licenciamento da Marvel, ele foi contratado para fazer o balão. Nós comentamos isso no ArgCast sobre o John Romita Sr. Se você quiser procurar no Spotify, no Deezer, na sua plataforma de podcast preferido, põe ArgCast John Romita Sênior, né? Vai aparecer lá o episódio. Ele comentou que ele fez todo o desenho de produção desse balão, que tem o formato do aranha. Na 7ª Avenida, ele ia flutuando, né, entre os prédios, no meio da parada, e ele achou horrível, assim, que os caras cortaram a lona, deu o maior trabalho, e ele achou o resultado uma merda. Aqui a gente vai poder ver o próprio balão em si.
No two ways about
Olha aí, velho. Treco gigante. Gigante. Olha a sombra do bichinho na parte de baixo aqui.
it. Spider-Man is big business on a global scale. And it all stems from those early days back in the Marvel offices.
My name is Ralph Macchio, and I am one of the senior editors up here.
Vejam, ele não é o Karate Kid, certo? Ele não é o Karate Kid. Então quem pensa isso ainda, porra, né? Vamos acordar aí.
Here at Marvel Comics.
Ralph Macchio has worked at Marvel for 30 years, editing the adventures of Spider-Man and Daredevil, among others, and he has first-hand experience of working with Steve Ditko.
It was fascinating because he would sit there with me over my shoulder and he would go through every single page, panel by panel. And it was like watching a master at work because I would be able to see how he would solve story problems. And he would just sit there, he'd have the plot on one side, he'd be over my shoulder, he'd have the paper in front of me, do it on loose leaf paper, and he would go into this, and this. The writer had a problem here, and I solved it this way. And you would just watch this guy, who was really a genius at storytelling, solve all these problems. And then once I approved it, as if I was ever not going to approve anything Steve Ditko did, he would take it, he would go away, a couple of weeks later he'd come back, and all the pencils would be done.
Eu estava comentando que o Ralph Macchio foi editor do Steve Ditko no período em que ele trabalhou com quadrinhos de licenciamento. Ele fez coisa de Power Rangers, ele fez coisa de... Ele desenhou Chuck Norris também, tinha um gibi do Chuck Norris. E sim, o gibi do Ron também, antes do Ron ser cancelado, ali por volta de 85, 86, né? As últimas histórias do Ron, Space Knight Warrior, né? Foram desenhadas por Steve Ditko. Uma delas, inclusive, é finalizada pelo John Byrne.
Although we've spoken almost exclusively about Spider-Man, there was another creation of Ditko's that was cleaning up with the fans. He was never as popular as Spider-Man, never will be, although he continues to crop up in other comic books, and every few years Marvel Comics dust him off and give him a new series. He was a surgeon, perhaps the greatest in the world, but he was vain and proud and callous towards others. Then a car crash left him with paralyzed hands, a genius no longer able to perform. And so he went in search of a cure, finding salvation of a different sort, and in the process becoming a master of a different skill, the occult. I give you Doctor Strange, master of the mystic arts. Doctor Strange first appeared in July 1963 as the backup feature in Marvel's Strange Tales.
When you open the first Doctor Strange story, the Nightmare story,
Aricana Brossa. Aí, Brossa, tudo bom? Obrigado, cara.
This guy who obviously cannot sleep, you're immediately sucked into the story. It's got this film noir kind of quality to it. The panels are small, but yet at the same time, the landscapes are expansive. When Doctor Strange gets into his ectoplasmic form, goes into the nightmare dimension, you begin to see these shapes and you begin to see these geometric things, and it's just incredible.
Doctor Strange's entire universe, with all of these psychedelic floating giant mouths and cubes and spheres, you suspect that probably Ditko was investing an awful lot of his own personal symbology in just the odd floating shapes in the background.
He really is almost being psychedelic before people took drugs.
Hello, my name is Cat Iron, and I've been involved in comics as an editor for many years. My interest in Steve Ditko goes back to my teenage years when I was reading Marvel Comics. Strange. I saw Spider-Man and I liked it, but Doctor Strange just sort of did something for me. It was very exciting to me because it was so unusual. Me and my friends who were Ditko cultists, who were hippies, who used marijuana and psychotropics of various sorts, DMT, LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, peyote. We certainly believed that Steve Ditko was on drugs.
If you read the Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, a lot of the characters in there would take the Doctor Strange comic and they would look at the pages and they would start dropping acid.
Então, tem muito dessa história. O Ditko já negou várias vezes, relatos também diziam que ele era muito certinho, mas evidentemente o pessoal tá conectando muito a informação. Tinha muito dessa história aí do Ditko ter usado de psicotrópicos para atingir, expandir o cosmo, como a gente viu lá no caso sobre o Jim Starlin, né? Mas talvez tenha até um aspecto de pesquisa, tal como que ele pesquisava um bocado sobre mitologia, né? Usava muito dessas referências nos quadrinhos dele. O Ditko também provavelmente lia sobre esse... E a gente tem que lembrar que aqui, apesar da escritora estar falando ser fã do trabalho do Ditko, tu nota que ela justamente estava envolvida com um movimento na contracultura, né? Com os hippies ali, ela fala sobre os festivais de rock, sobre o uso de ácido, essa coisa toda. E o próprio trabalho do Ditko é anterior a isso. É anterior ao movimento hippie, da contracultura, contestando a guerra no Vietnã e tudo isso mais. Então, sabe, se o Ditko pesquisou a respeito antes para dar esse background para o personagem, visualmente falando, ou se ele acabou se aprofundando mais nesse sentido, a gente não sabe exatamente. Mas vindo de depoimentos dele, é negado isso.
Very odd piece of work in that Steve Ditko, who was politically very conservative, was suddenly the idol of a whole generation of hippies who were reading some kind of drug parable.
Ele era extremamente conservador, né? E o cara acabou sendo referência pra caralhada de hippie depois.
All without ever leaving his Greenwich Village apartment. He would just be sitting there on the floor in a trance while imagining that he was battling the dread Dormammu in some kind of zone of the nether dimensions.
I asked Steve about that. I said, Steve, I know you're not into hallucinogens and all that. I said, where did that come from? He said it was just thought. He said, I just put a lot of thought into what another world would look like. And this is what came out of his head.
Ele só pensou como é que ia ser um mundo fora do
There are
nosso
things
mundo.
about Ditko that are unusual, and there are people who seek those unusual states by taking drugs, and there are people who were sure that Steve Ditko had taken drugs, but I don't think it's so. I think that Ditko just had an unusual mind.
In the name of Rael, scourge of demons.
Olha aí, ó. O Doutor Estranho antes do filme do Cupcake, Benedito Cupcake.
Say it.
In the name of Rael, scourge of demons, I command you be gone.
Must be exactly those words.
How do I get back?
On the astral planes, action follows thought. Will yourself to return to Earth. Hold the thought in your mind, and you'll come back.
When does it begin?
Now.
I've seen still pictures of it, and based on the still pictures, I could see why it probably didn't work.
It's not a terribly good, it's not a terribly thrilling viewing experience. So with Doctor Strange a genuine cult hit and Spider-Man going from strength to strength, it's clear that Steve Ditko was at the height of his powers, and his partnership with Stan Lee was a huge commercial success. But in a move that surprised everyone except presumably Ditko himself, he walked away from both those comics and Marvel. It was the equivalent in the comic book world of John Lennon leaving Paul McCartney after releasing Help. And to get to grips with the most mysterious moment in comic book history, I'd like to introduce another great comic book creator and big Ditko fan.
My name is Neil Gaiman. I'm a writer. One of the things I write is comics.
Neil has worked for all the major comic book companies and is the creator of the sublime Sandman. He believes that Steve may have walked out on his collaborator Stan Lee for political reasons.
There are famously a number of issues that they clashed over. Stan is meant to have looked at comments of Ditko's where Spider-Man is swinging past protesters, and he's meant to be saying things like, now just look at those dirty hippies down there. Stan would go in and give him a word balloon that says, hey kids, I'm with you, or whatever. And you feel that, you know, politically, there's a wonderful sort of clash there between swinging Stan Lee and magnificently uptight, world-class uptight, possibly uptight Steve Ditko.
Theory was the disagreement about the revelation of the identity of Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin.
Should the Green Goblin be...
Interessante, ó. A gente comentou há pouco, né, da Flo, da semelhança dela com a Betty. A gente comentou há pouco sobre o processo de criação do Steve Ditko ser bastante centralizador, ou seja, ele fazia o desenho, a arte final e, consequentemente, desenvolvia o plot. Inicialmente era sugerido todo pelo próprio Stan Lee, mas chegou um momento que apenas tinha uma demanda, olha, ele vai ter que combater tal vilão, o Ditko desdobrava praticamente tudo sozinho e o Stan Lee corria para desenvolver os diálogos depois. Um dos aspectos que acaba conectando com esse poder centralizador do Ditko no entorno do Aranha nesse período é a discordância deles pro modo como o Duende Verde ia ser apresentado dentro das histórias, né? Mas eu quero apenas fazer um pequeno à parte, pegando essa aparição do Duende Verde aqui que vocês estão vendo. Observem bem a estrutura do rosto e me digam se quando o John Byrne desenhou as histórias do Aranha, acho que foi ali justamente no Gênesis, né, que é o Chapter 1, que ele estava recontando a história do Aranha, ou aquela fase mesmo lá com o roteiro do Howard Make. O traço do rosto do Duende Verde era extremamente Steve Ditko.
Steve wanted it to be someone that no one had seen before, that this was just a random character, because he said in real life, chances are if there was somebody like this, you wouldn't know who it was. But Stan felt for dramatic purposes, if you reveal who the Green Goblin is, it has to be someone in the cast.
I've heard the Green Goblin story too, that he didn't want the Green Goblin to be Norman because he felt it was, you know, what are the chances that your arch nemesis is your best friend's father?
Viram aí então um dos conflitos mais célebres, né, que é especulado. Stan Lee queria que fosse um personagem dentro do universo do Peter Parker, a identidade secreta do Duende Verde. O Steve Ditko não queria.
Obviously, Stan was right. Stan's instincts as a storyteller were absolutely spot on.
É o papel do editor, saber o que o público está querendo se surpreender, né?
Yet another supposed deal breaker was whether Peter Parker should graduate from college.
I know when I talked with him, again, a lot had to do with what he felt was the essence of Peter Parker, that this was a high school character, that once you graduated him from high school, it was just no longer a character that could make mistakes. So it was time for... Steve just came in one day, dropped off his last Spider-Man, and told whoever it was that was there, that was it. He was done, and he was leaving.
Both Spider-Man and Doctor Strange were big hits with Marvel fans, so Ditko's leaving potentially posed huge problems for the company. Stan Lee moved quickly to replace him. I went to Long Island to meet the man who had the tough task of stepping into Ditko's shoes.
I'm John Romita.
Romitão!
For probably 40 years, and had a ball and paid off my mortgage.
John Romita was working on the reasonably successful Daredevil series when he was asked to take over Spider-Man from Steve Ditko.
Losing a guy like Ditko could have been catastrophic for Marvel in its infancy. And yet here's a guy like John Romita, just in the wings. It was a magical time. And that's how these things happen.
I wouldn't have been able to pick up Spider-Man and hit the ground running if it hadn't been established so beautifully and so soundly. It was a working machine when I got it, and all I had to do was put the oil in.
But John and Steve's styles were radically different.
Bem lembrado, eram muito diferentes. O John Romita Sênior, ele vem dos quadrinhos de romance que eram publicados, né? Tanto na DC, depois passaram a ser publicados na Marvel também. ele tinha as figuras muito elegantes, era difícil ver ele desenhando personagens muito jovens e frágeis, né? E nessa constituição de corpo aqui que a gente está vendo o Demolidor e o Homem-Aranha no traço do Romita, a gente nota também que nessa fase aqui, o John Romita Sr., ele tenta emular um pouco até a estrutura do uniforme do traje do Aranha, com as teias muito juntas, né? Mas a figura do Demolidor, a gente já percebe que ele tinha um shape para a figura muito diferente do Ditko, né? Mas ele precisou, e esse respeito pelo legado do Ditko estético dentro do gibi, era justamente porque na cabeça do Romitão, ele não conseguia conceber que o Ditko tinha saído num dos títulos de maior vendagem que projetava ele tanto. Ele achava assim, isso é só é passageiro, ele vai acabar voltando. Então por que eu vou tentar mudar o que já estava funcionando, né?
And John had difficulty copying Steve's idiosyncratic look.
Stan liked Ditko's offbeat stuff, and what he liked about it was that Peter Parker was not a heroic kid. He was a scrawny young kid who's a little off, a little strange, can't get along, you know. And for some reason, when I take over a book, all my heroes are handsome.
Incredibly handsome.
I can't help it. I started to clean things up and toothpaste smile everybody to death, and I thought it was going to kill it. I really thought it was. And Stan did. Stan said, no, it's not going to work. And I said, well, I'll try, I'll try. Finally, he just threw his hands up and said, do it the way you want.
John Romita's toothpaste smile soon spread to the Marvel management when his new-look Spider-Man became an even bigger hit with the public. Within a year, Spider-Man shot into the top 10 highest-earning comics.
See, Ditko, his version of what he was doing was true. It's just that it didn't fit Stan's commercial sense. And Stan had an uncanny commercial sense. And any artist that fought him on it, I think was making a terrible mistake, because Ditko could have made a fortune. Now, I guess he doesn't care. He didn't care about money.
Well, he doesn't seem to care at all even now when they ask him.
Right. I mean, so his objectives were different than mine. I was just trying to pay my mortgage off. And I wanted to get the best-selling book I could. And I stayed with Spider-Man as long as possible because I'm making money, you know. And he baffled me. And I admire him, and I wish he hadn't done it, because I would love to have seen him independently wealthy now.
Spider-Man's sales may have gone through the roof, but the Ditko fans were disappointed.
Steve Ditko had got so much of his DNA in all of the characters that he created. I mean, I know that there were good issues of Spider-Man after he finished the book with issue 35, something like that. I know that John Romita did some very good work on Spider-Man, but I kind of lost interest with the first non-Ditko issue, because the character was so much a part of Ditko's world that it looked kind of dull when it was an ordinarily muscled man in a Spider-Man costume.
O pessoal percebeu isso direto, né? A mudança do shape do personagem, que era um outro perfil de autor, né?